But without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I would invite my distinguished speakers now, Brendan Dunford, Doug Macmillan, Jürgen Tack, and of course Matteo, who will be joining us in line to join me on the podium. Please. Brendan, you're next to me. Doug, you're second, and Jürgen at the end. How are you? Nice to meet you. Good to meet you. And Doug, I was speaking with you earlier, so whenever you're ready, yeah, he's just getting mic'd up. So perhaps I will just go through my introductions. I see Matteo is also online, which is fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm fine. Just gentleman here. Thank you very much. So, good to see you again, Doug. Good. So, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to Brendan Dunford, who is a founder of and volunteer with the Burren Beo Trust, located in the idyllic village of Kinvara in County Clare. Right. Burren Beo Trust is a charity dedicated to promoting and enabling community stewardship across Ireland. Within Burren Beo, Brendan works directly on projects including the Hare's Corner, Farming for Nature and the Burren Winterage Weekend. And between 2005 and 2022, he led the award-winning Burren Life project and its successor, the Burren Programme, an early pioneer of a results-based payment scheme. So we look forward to hearing from you, Brendan, in a moment. Next up, we have Mr. Doug Macmillan, who is founder of the Green Restoration Ireland Cooperative, the GRI, which was established back in 2019. Doug holds a PhD in environmental sciences, and he also manages several projects such as the Farm Carbon EIP, bit of a Freudian slip there, the Farm Carbon Transition EIP, and the Peatlands for Prosperity. And during the Farm Carbon EIP, GRI developed innovative approaches to help farmers restore damaged peatlands to maximise carbon storage and biodiversity. A key issue here in Ireland, obviously, when it comes to peatlands, Doug, so good to meet you in person. Next up, a very warm welcome to Mr. Jürgen Tack, who is Secretary General of the European Landowners Organisation, the ELO, since 2023. And the ELO is, of course, a forum founder. Jürgen and I are well used to sharing the stage together with one another, but now, Jürgen, you're on my turf for a change, right? So a very warm Céad Míle Fáilte to yourself. Jürgen's background, ladies and gentlemen, is in marine ecology, and he holds a PhD in the sciences. Now, based on past experience, on my past experience, Jürgen always has a trick up his sleeve, but today he reassures me that there's no tricks up his sleeves when delivering his presentation. And last but by no means least, we have Matteo Vancini, who is joining us online. Good afternoon, Matteo.
Hello, Arnold. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome, Matteo. A very warm welcome from Dublin City. Matteo is co-founder of the Place Finance Lab, which is part of the Climate Kick, and is a centre for financial innovation and regeneration that enables collaborative design of new structures that let finance flow towards regional resilient food systems. Matteo is an innovative finance professional with a background in international development. So a very warm welcome to you, Matteo. We look forward to hearing from you in a moment. But please, first of all, ladies and gentlemen, give my distinguished speakers a warm round of applause. So, as before in the first session, each one will deliver a 5-minute introductory statement. Keep an eye on the time. It's just right in front of you on the countdown clock. Just drawing, I suppose, on your experience, drawing on the work that you do within your organizations, on how we can finance and accelerate that transition that we spoke about earlier in the first session, how we can work that transition on the ground. And at around 3 p.m., ladies and gentlemen, I will open it up to the floor for questions. So Brendan, take it away. We look forward to hearing your impulse statement, particularly drawing on your experience at Burren Beo down in Kinvara. Go right ahead, Brendan.
Thanks very much, Rose. I appreciate it. And I've got a countdown clock. That's
you
the first
sure
for me.
There you go. Well, listen.
Fascinating. Lovely to be here, and I hope I can make a relevant and meaningful contribution. I guess my day job is working very closely with farmers on the ground. And as we know, there's no such thing as a typical farmer. They're just so different. The farm size, the history of the farm, how he came to begin farming, the whole story, and how that farmer has reacted and responded over the years to the various political and scientific inputs and advisory services. But I'm from a farming background in Waterford, a small farm, and at that time when I grew up, every cow had a name, every field had a name. It was a very intimate relationship with the land. So much different from today, 50 years later. It's really extraordinary. But I came back to Ireland about in the I think late 90s to do a PhD in a place called the Burren, which is famous for biodiversity. But it's also famous for farming because farmers have been there, we know, for 6,000 years farming that amazing landscape. And the Burren is famous for biodiversity, for archaeology, for geology. But a lot of people forget that it's also famous for farming, especially if you're a farmer who lives there. And my PhD was looking at the relationship between farming and biodiversity in the Burren. And lo and behold, after 3 years of research on my knees on the ground, and I have one of the farmers here, Tom, I was able to point out that the Burren's biodiversity is entirely dependent on a continuation of farming practices, in particular reverse transhumance, also known as winterage. And I remember presenting this finding to a group in the room, farmers and others, and the farmer said, sure, we knew that all along. What did you spend 3 years finding that out for?
You had a PhD to tell them that.
Exactly. But bringing science to bear on opinion was really, really important. So that to me was an epiphany, because when I thought about it, farmers, I realized, aren't just producers of food, they're also producers of these other ecosystem services. The problem is not paid for the rest of them. They're only paid for that food commodity. So we were given funding by the Department of Ag at the time, unspent single farm payment funding, to create a program that rolled across the Burren. And that's when we introduced the notion of result-based payments. It was really a case of rewarding farmers who delivered the most for biodiversity. And we were told at the time, you're mad, it won't work, farmers will be complaining all the time, it's not clear enough. Farmers took to it like a collective duck to water, because for them it was like bringing your animal to the market. The better the condition, the more money you got. If it was in rag order, you brought your animal home. Same principles applied to the environment at field level. The more you delivered for nature, for water, for soils, using a simple assessment, the more money you got. And for 12 years, I managed that program in the Burren, and every single year, for less than €1 million in Ireland's iconic landscape, covering about 30,000 hectares of land, we were able to show a measurable improvement in environmental performance. The lesson to me from that is what's possible when we mobilise farmers for nature conservation and for environmental change. So that was a hugely successful project, and it was based on 3 principles. I also come back to it: the pocket, head and heart. And I know we're focusing on the pocket, the financial piece today, but don't forget about the head and the heart. For us, the financial piece is and must be around result-based payments, if only for the reason that farmers love to earn money. They don't like to be given handouts of compensation. But if you give farmers a challenge and they have to work to deliver on that challenge, they will appreciate that payment fully. So result-based payments work for nature, they work for the taxpayer because you only pay for what you get, and they work for the environment because they stimulate improvement all the time. But I just want to mention, don't forget about the head and the heart. If you want advice on how to farm for dairy or for beef, you know where to go. You go to your local Teagasc office. But if you want to farm for nature or for carbon, for climate, it's a very confusing space. Nobody knows where to go. So having local offices is really, really important. And I think the National Acre Scheme now has the principle of having local offices and result-based payments. Now, there's been problems with implementation and problems with the tech around it and delayed payments. It hasn't been ideal, but in principle, I think they're heading in the right direction. And our fair play to our Ministry of Agriculture, our department, they're European leaders in result-based payments, and it will work. It is the way forward. The third piece for me is about the heart piece. For years, we've been putting money into the environment, and I'd argue that we haven't been getting great value for money, and that's because farmers haven't been engaged, because I think nature conservation in particular has been too much led by the expert and the policymaker and maybe the NGOs, and farmers have felt left behind. And now there's a divide, and until we cross that divide, bridge that divide, I think we're going to lose. So we've been doing a lot in farm engagement, giving control back to the farmer of the narrative. So we set up Farm for Nature with ambassadors right across Ireland and Europe now who are great proponents of sustainable farming. They're owning the narrative, owning the story, and I think that's the way forward. Give farmers ownership, having these ambassadors. By the way, the best way to influence the farmer is through another farmer. So this is why we set up this peer support and advisory networks. The final thing I wanted to say is that I moved away from the public funded space 2 years ago, and I met with a colleague called Anke Heidenreich, and we set up Refarm. And Refarm is a project where we're bringing corporate, philanthropic and public sector funding to farmers to deliver for nature. And we started last year with 80 farmers. We're doubling this year to 160. And what we're saying to farmers is, look, you can deliver more for nature more quickly and at better value than anybody else. And we say this to companies as well. So we have a number of companies who are sponsoring us, also philanthropic funding. And what happens is, very simply, the funder gives the money to the farmer to create wildlife ponds, hedgerows, small woodland habitats to support species-rich grassland or to do an action that the farmer really wants to do. The payment is immediate. There's no paperwork, one-page terms and conditions, that's it. You do something today, you get paid by the end of the week. Farmers love that. And the proof is in the pudding. The impact has been huge. So I'd argue that if we want to get out of this climate and biodiversity crisis, the solution is right in front of us.
Right.
It's farmers.
They're
We just
staring
need
at
to
us.
mobilise them.
That's
Action.
that pocket, head and heart, Brendan.
it.
Eloquently put. Doug, your own point of view from the GRI perspective.
Okay, what was
This
going
whole
to be
question.
the slides?
There are
behind?
slides, ladies and gentlemen, of
Just
the tech team. Yeah.
Apologies to Matteo.
Yeah, no problem. We'll
disappear
just go
for a
to 2
brief
slides
while.
for Doug.
Okay, so we deal a lot with peatland farming, not exclusively, but mainly peat. So I'm just going to assume that not everyone knows what peat is. So just back to basics very quickly. I'm going to take my cog notes, and I'm going to imagine on a normal dry ecosystem, that will take CO2 from the air at the end of the season. That will all degrade and go back into the air. Whereas in a peatland ecosystem, because it's wet, there's not enough oxygen, and probably because it's too acidic, let's say maybe 10-15% will accumulate. And that's what peat is, that accumulates indefinitely if it's not interrupted. And this is why it's such a significant, it's the most space-efficient carbon storing ecosystem on Earth. So big source of emissions in Ireland. That'll be the third one, Stuart, after manure, methane, and peatland soils. Don't forget the third one. You need to add that into your talk. So just very quickly, so we did what was called the Farm Carbon EIP. We were tasked with looking at peat grasslands because the issue at the time was we have over 300,000 hectares of this. There was a generic assumption made they were emitting up to 30 tons of CO2 per hectare per year, so maybe the biggest single source of emissions in the country. And we were tasked with finding a solution, which we did. So first of all, we were very deficient in terms of emission factors, indigenous emission factors here. So my colleague Bastian, Dutchman, always very handy to have a Dutchman on board when you're looking at peatlands. So he took very comprehensive Dutch peat shrinkage data, UK data, and a little bit of peat data from Ireland, which was quite anomalous. He put it on a graph, and it was a straight line, and it meant that every 10 centimeters change in water level equated to 5 tons of CO2 per hectare per year being emitted from that field. So what that meant was that any change in water level in the ditch and in the fields we were looking at that were typically drained to a meter or more was significant. It had significant climate benefits. So what we proposed to the farmers was a graduated approach. If they wanted to do 20 centimeters, it was good. We paid them a certain amount. If they wanted to go halfway, we paid them more. And if they wanted to go all the way, and that would essentially involve summer grazing, we would pay them more again. However, there was another factor, so that was our graduated approach. That's what we proposed for peat grasslands. We can go halfway, get huge climate benefits and water quality and biodiversity benefits, and we can work out how do we deal with the next thing. So the 40 centimeter below the surface level was key, the thing that Bastian identified as well. Above this, you start to impact farming because the peat will be wet, so you have less grazing days, and also the peat, which is all carbon with some nutrients, stops degrading and supplying up to 300 kilos of nitrate per hectare per year. So you're going to get less productivities. How do we keep farming? So I went over to the UK, I looked at the Lancashire Wildlife Trust work over there, and they're doing great work in Winmarleigh and Rindlemoss, and I brought it back, and I said, that's what we have to do here. So if you look on the bottom right, this is our showroom farm. So this is where we first did this paludiculture. We raised the water table, and what we wanted to do was to answer the farmer's question, which is, what the hell use is wet peat? So the answer is fruit, vegetables, horticultural materials, built construction, textile materials, wet grasses as well also, and also forestry. So that's what we did at the first farm, demonstration farm, and then we set up a larger one, and the aim was to move away from proving the principle of growing things like blueberries, cranberries, grasses, cattails, and so on, towards commercial viability. So if you can see there on the bottom left, that's part of that. That's one of the farms around this bog. So we also wanted to give farmers a range of options. One of the issues, I think, with paludiculture or wet agriculture is basically producing crops at a higher water level is I think there's been a bit of channeling. It's kind of very much focused on sphagnum and bulrushes, which is not necessary, and polders maybe, which is not necessarily something farmers want to do. So we wanted to give farmers as wide a range of options as we could. So this is just a vision, how it might look. It's about 100 acres of bog, and then we also had what we call a 3-zone approach. What we propose is there's a paludiculture restoration mosaic. So if you look in the middle, the brown is raised bog. Ireland has 50% of everything that's left in Western Europe. So ecologically, it's critical, huge carbon store. We need to restore this, and there could be carbon credits or biodiversity payments for this. The surrounding area is cut over, which has been cut for peat and then abandoned. Scrubber wouldn't come in and dry out the peat even more, causing huge emissions. So that area is ripe for testing. That provides no income to the farmer, and this is a huge opportunity for Ireland to work out all of the answers to these questions, because it's like, okay, how do I farm blueberries? How do I harvest cattails? These are all legitimate questions. So let's leave the farmers farm away on the third zone, where we maybe raise the water table halfway, while we figure out what we're going to do in the cutover zone, which is just sitting there doing nothing. It's ecologically degraded because the trees dry out the peat. You have significant air and water pollution and impacted biodiversity. And then the last thing as well, where you have a lot of woodland, we're not proposing to grub that out. We think that could actually be re-wet. We can obtain income from this, and then it could be coppiced on rotation to provide biochar-based fertilizers. That's one of the ideas. And then if you just, I think the next one, yeah, so the aim is each of these areas, the little colored dots, they're raised bog or they're blanket bog. As Brendan was saying, there's a unique community of farmers and practices and cultural communities around these. So what we want to do is give the farmers the choice what they want to grow at their own pace and let them do it.
Okay, a lot of information there, Doug. We'll be going into in more detail, but it's great to see, as you say, that restoration of damaged peatlands and seeing their worth and enhancing, and as you say, creating an income then for the farmers. So thank you very much indeed. So Jürgen, you're hearing from very different perspectives here. We've got a real Irish feel to this discussion, Jürgen, so perhaps it's different to your usual territory. But we look forward to hearing from you now, because I know this is a topic close to your heart in terms of this idea of financing the transition. So Jürgen, when you're ready, take it away.
Well, it certainly is, and don't worry, Ireland is not the only country with peatlands. So, but let me first, because many of in the room probably do not know what European Landowners is. We are an advocacy organization for private landowners all over Europe. Let's say in total we have 67 membership, since this morning, 68 membership organizations. They're all together representing 2.8 million private landowners. 80% of those members are farmers, 60% are foresters, and 40% are dedicating at least part of their land to nature conservation. I know this is adding up to much more than 100%, giving an indication that most of our members are combining 2 or even 3 of those activities. What is important to say, they're all private landowners, so they have a focus to bring their land to the next generation, at least with the same quality as the way they got the land from their parents or the way they bought their land. And that makes that with 80% of our members having farming activities, we do have a keen interest in the Common Agriculture Policy and everything which is under negotiation for the next Common Agricultural Policy. And let's say that resulted in a small conflict with the present commissioner because he is focusing very much to redistribute the CAP subsidies to those who need it the most. And let's say from within the organization, from the very beginning, we have been paraphrasing that. No, Commissioner, the money should go to those who deserve it the most. If I have at home solar panels, then it's for everybody very, very logic that if I get subsidies, that those subsidies are linked to the energy I'm generating. Should be the same with farming subsidies. And let's say throughout the past decades, we have Common Agriculture Policy since 1962. That was first of all about production. So yes, we should make sure that farmers who are producing are getting, let's say, part of those subsidies. And since 1962, we have seen a shift within the Common Agriculture Policy also to support environmental measures. And there too, we should support farmers in function of what they're realizing within those environmental measures. And there, let's say, the concept of payment for ecosystem services is something we have a very keen interest because we do see that there is an opportunity to have a kind of additional income on top of the income you get from your production. As most farmers are delivering much more than only food or feed. They are responsible for the quality of their soil. They are responsible for the quality of the water and so on. So let's make sure that there too they can earn some money. 5 years ago, we had the concept of carbon farming, and let's say there is a link with what I've heard before. I do remember that 5 years ago we made an overview of companies and organizations which were active in carbon farming or which claimed that they were able to do carbon credits and carbon certificates. And we had a list of more than 550 spread over all of Europe. If today we take that list again with us, there are still 37 companies and organizations left. So that makes quite a number disappeared. Why is that? Let's say because in those 5 years we have been developing the concept, but first of all it's taking a very long time to come to a final framework. Secondly, what we see is that year by year, month by month, we are putting additional layers of legislation, additional layers of policy. The reason quite often for that is that, let's say, especially under pressure of environmental organizations, they do not want to have greenwashing. But of course, at a certain moment, if you put layer by layer of legislation, things are becoming so complicated that, let's say, farmers are losing their interest to participate. And that is something we absolutely have to avoid to make this a success. Now, more recently, we have seen that the Commission is coming up with the concept of nature credits. So again, we see all kinds of opportunities. And yes, again, we see quite a number of organizations and innovative companies popping up, promising they will be able to deliver carbon credits and nature credits and nature certificates. And at the same time, we see that the Commission is making all of the same mistakes that they have been making with carbon farming. And I think there again, we are thinking about a legal framework, and it's already taking 2-3 years. It will take most probably another 2-3 years before we come into a system where we start to understand what they want, what we can offer, what those companies can offer. But in the meantime, we are already building again legislation on top of legislation, and again, those different layers, with the risk that at a certain moment, those farmers are going to lose their interest again. Let's say we have now, from an ELO perspective, because we see this happening, and let's say, okay, if the others are making the same mistakes, we have to make sure at least that from an organization's perspective, we are not making the same mistakes by reacting in the same way. So we are setting up now a kind of investment certificate on top of nature credits, so that, let's say, companies which have an interest to invest in private landowners who are doing things for the improvement of biodiversity, then they can invest. The private landowner is getting the money, is doing the job, and let's say in the coming years, if that private landowner is able to get carbon credits, he will repay the investor based on the carbon credits. But that's a way that we do not have to wait for another 3-4 years to see what the Commission is finally going to do.
You're taking it into your own hands as an organization, right?
I think, well, let's say, I think everything we are hearing here are people who are trying to take that in their own hands. But we have to be careful, because what we see is that the Commission has that urgency to control those markets. And let's say if there is a danger, is that if we are trying to control those markets, we are going to over-regulate those markets, and we're going to see that we are losing the interest.
Yeah, which has, as you say, has been the case perhaps with carbon farming. Thank you, Jürgen, for that. That's a very sort of, I suppose, you're really coming from the ELO perspective, and I think the audience here, some of them perhaps needed a little bit of perspective on that debate. So thank you, Jürgen. Matteo, we come to you now. You've heard from our 3 speakers here. We look forward to hearing from you now, the Climate Kick and, as I say, Place Finance Lab. So Matteo, please take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Rose, and hello, everybody. I wish I was there with you in Dublin. Yes, so starting with a bit of an intro of what the Place Finance Live aims to do. It's a financial innovation layer onto local and regional initiatives that works to transform food system. And Stuart, my colleague before, was representing one, the deep demonstration in Ireland, but we're working also with one in the southwest of England, across Cornwall and Devon, initiated under the umbrella of the Peninsula Food Plan, which asked the question, what would it take to produce 80% and be 80% food secure across Cornwall and Devon, and the climates, it's similar across these two regions, Ireland and the southwest of England. So we thought of asking why are those projects that have been identified through this initiative not getting funded? And the realization and our research pointed us into the direction that, yes, it's true that sometimes the projects are too small, perhaps non-viable, often people refer to as non-bankable. But sometimes it's not only a problem on the project side, there is a lot that can be done on the financial structuring and how the existing instruments that allow to deploy and absorb capital are designed and kind of gone into the term sheet of those instruments. And I think that's where there is a lot that can be done. I sometimes say it's not just about making the projects bankable, but also making the banks a bit more projectable. And that's the effort that we want to kind of undertake and collaboratively design those instruments, starting with a couple of initiatives. So very much coming from the kind of kick deep demonstration in Ireland and the work that Stuart, I heard also he mentioned. But what's interesting to me today is picking up a bit on what Brendan was mentioning and results-based finance, and I would say also blended finance, and this idea that we need to build a capital stack that is diverse and bringing different actors together, moving beyond simply using public and concessional capital to the risk investment. What are we giving in exchange? And I think here the concept that is increasingly getting momentum and very much not only becoming more and more recognized, but also becoming a tool that we can use to build investment is the concept of resilient dividends. Investing in resilience is not just about the narrative of making the supply chain more locable and short. It's not just about risk mitigation. It's about value creation, creating more value locally. It's a good investment, whether or not that disaster or this catastrophe is happening further down the line. It's about bringing that value closer to the producer, to the processor, to the retailers, and very much building the investments around that. And it goes beyond the environmental outcomes. Investing in water quality for someone is a cost savings. Investing in soil health, the same emissions, biodiversity have their narratives around, and we heard a lot today. But there is a lot that can be said also with respect to the economic returns and what does it mean for economic and regional development and from a local authority perspective, for instance. So the way that we are trying to bring all those aspects together is moving beyond the supply chain programs, the one landlord, one farmer, on-farm transition, but taking a place-based approach at the landscape levels. There are good examples coming out, for example, the UK, where you have a few initiators, both supply-led, so you have a couple of farmer clusters, or demand-led, for example, local enterprise network is a good example on that, where it's about what can be done at the landscape level, what kind of interventions can be implemented, and what are the multitudes of outcomes that this can be delivering. And as was said already, it's not just about working in silos and having a water schemes, a biodiversity scheme, and a carbon schemes, and then having to juggle across different schemes with their own rules and reporting requirements, but very much trying to compile all together in one unique payment that rewards for the actions that have been taken, but is valued because based on the outcome it delivers to multiple actors. And we are taking as a kind of last points with respect to the concrete project and products that we are working on. We take the lesson learned from the social impact bonds, development impact bonds, and the idea of outcome marketplace to try to, at the landscape level, contractualize and pool all these outcomes and payment in one unique structure so that the farmer can be offered that menu of options, implement that, be paid for that with the money that are pulled together by the different outcome payers that are in there, not out of just generosity or because of the outcomes, but because they see the commercial interests and value it delivers to their business.
Okay, very clear indeed, Matteo, and bravo on your English. That's quite impressive to an Irish international audience. So we'll be coming back to you in a moment on some of the points that you raised there, but I might just do a quick round if I may. Brendan, we said at the very top of this session, perhaps in my introduction, that obviously we're discussing the reform of the Common Agricultural Policy. And sometimes there's this idea that, we're over in Brussels, there's a number of EU institutions. We met Nina Carberry at the beginning of our session here. Do you think, Brendan, that there's a disconnect? You've been working in the Burren now for 25 years, I understand. You're a County Waterford man. Do you think there's a disconnect between the policy makers coming up with this, whether it's the schemes, the agri-environmental schemes, rural development schemes, and then the farmers, as you so eloquently put it, the farmers on the ground who work with the pocket, the heart and the head? Do you think that there's a disconnect between the two there, the farmers on the ground and the institutional sort of process?
Well, I mean, yes.
Yes.
But I think
how can we remedy that, or how can we bridge it?
The real issue is that it's probably a growing disconnect, unfortunately.
Right.
I think the disconnect has been there, and it's a growing disconnect, but I don't think it stops there. I think there's also a disconnect between a lot of the science and the research and the farmer as well. So I think there's a number of disconnects, unfortunately. And I always think that the best way is to start with the farmer and work back, because ultimately the change is going to come at farm level. So we have to start with the farmer. What motivates the farmer financially, emotionally, in terms of the intellect as well, and you work back from that. You design your schemes along that. The policies then are informed by that scheme design, and that's where you get results. I think too often, and I know myself, as you go through life, you end up increasingly less out in the field and more behind the desk, and the disconnect does grow. It's quite easy then to start making plans and thinking you're making a huge difference, and you're making a difference, but it's the guy out on the ground or the woman out on the ground who's going to make the ultimate difference. And I think for too long, the role of the farmer in terms of delivering environmental outcomes has been subservient to that of the policymaker and the scientists, and I think we should flip it around. All those things are hugely important. Good policy, good strategy, good science, but really what about good practice? I think we've lost sight of that.
Well done. Well said, Brendan. Well said. Doug, you're nodding away there, and obviously you're coming from a scientific background yourself, a PhD in environmental science, if I remember correctly. How can we put, I suppose, science at the centre of policy making, and how can we sort of root, sensible policy in a scientific sort of context? Do you think it's being done, or do you think there's room for improvement there?
Brendan's a scientist as well. I'm not the only one.
Yeah, sure, correct.
But anyway.
I'm a woolly scientist at best.
Woolly. Well, I think we're more applied science, Rose, So we're doing, again, I didn't go on too much because I could have gone all day. But we're very much applied science. So what's working in the field, as Brendan's saying, so like a whole idea of working with the cutover comes from the farmers, because they're saying, well, I've got this grassland and I have this abandoned bog. Why are you annoying me about the field which I make income from, and why don't you do something? So this is where we're focused. I suppose I was just nodding with what Brendan was saying. So start with the farmer and work backwards. And then also it's about what we think about is, because this needs money, right? So we have over 600,000 hectares of cutaway in Ireland, or cut over. It's just sitting there in a lot of cases. It's damaging economically, environmentally. So our model is essentially how do we get the income to do this? And what we think is use what's available. So that's carbon, but I don't agree with carbon it should be integrated. One of the issues with carbon credits is they're about 20, 30 euros a ton, which is a waste of time. There need to be a higher value. The German federal government has done the CBA on 1 ton of CO2 is 880 euros of damage it does to everything. So we're way away from that. So what we're more into is an integrated approach. So it's carbon, biodiversity, ecosystem services, and then actually keeping farmers farming, because without land managers in the environment doing the culture shift that Stuart was talking about, maybe doing what they always did plus new things, we're at nothing. We have to keep people there. So maybe I deviated from the science question, but we're very, and then, sorry, just also to add, so we're actually doing, and the thing is, because this is wet agriculture, everything you do is new. So we have our 2 farms there. We're setting up a network around the country. Again, as Brendan was saying, we need demo farms around the country that local farmers can come speak to their local farmers. They can tell them, oh, blueberries are good, or cranberries cause these problems, or whatever, right? So we'll actually be out with the team. We're out in North Kildare setting up a new one tomorrow. So yeah, and then also working with the farmers that want to do that. So, empower them, farmers insofar as they want to be doing the science. Let's enable them to do it and work with them and listen to their observations. What's the term is traditional farm knowledge, or T? What's the buzzword?
Oh, yeah, that would...
I don't know the one, but listen to, the farmers have the knowledge, listen to them. And then, for example, when we're doing this, what we're finding out is very interesting things like, strawberries. We all know potatoes used to be grown on bog, but strawberries and a whole load of things used to be grown on bogs. So work with the farmers, work with them to do what they want to do. We give them a range of crops. We don't say you have to do this or this. We say give them as big a choice as possible and work with them, and then learn with them. Because, they can observe what's growing and what isn't doing well. And this is...
And as you say as well, diversifying our base, right? Our
Absolutely.
Food sources as well.
Because we import most of the food that we consume. We export a lot, but most of our food is imported.
I know that's a good point. That's the whole different conversation, I suppose, Doug, but that's a good point indeed. Jürgen, you spoke obviously there about taking things into your own hands, this idea of the investment certificate on top of nature credits. You might delve into that a little bit. Has that already been initiated? Is it working on the ground? What you spoke about, I suppose, the barriers and maybe the frustration with the regulatory system in place, and perhaps the whole politics behind food production, the whole politics behind even the Common Agricultural Policy itself, which we'll be going into in a moment with Ricard Ramon. But maybe that example, Jürgen, maybe you might bring that sort of into more detail, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Well, let's say that is directly related to investment. And I think there we see one of the major issues when we were talking about is the former recognizing what Brussels is doing. What we see is that whether we are speaking about climate change or we are speaking about biodiversity loss, if you speak with environmental organizations, they will tell you that the issue is urgent and we have to solve it tomorrow morning. But if you're speaking with a politician, he's counting his votes for not more than what is going to happen within 5 years. But in the meantime, that politician is working on a common agriculture policy, which is taking a 7-year period. And what we are completely forgetting is a farmer who is making investments on a 30-year period. And so that farmer, if he's taking a decision, that is a decision that has to stand for the next 30 years. And if you're systematically changing your policy in the meantime, well, first of all, it's difficult to make sure that you're still able to repay your loan within 30 years, but it's at the same time difficult to get a new loan because also the financial institutes are trying to find out, are you going to be capable of getting your money back? And then if you're speaking about innovative systems like carbon certification, nature credits, we have to make sure that let's say, we are building systems which are able to bridge that gap between that 30 years financing from a farmer's perspective and the very short period we need to act. And let's say, it's very nice to set up systems with carbon farming, with nature credits, but if you cannot guarantee that within 20, 25 years, this is still a valid system, then it's very difficult to attract farmers to step into this type of initiatives. Mm-hmm. And that is where we are trying, let's say, to make sure that there is a kind of investment instrument on the long term, which is understood by farmers, which is just trying to bridge that gap between the very short-term objectives of nature credits, carbon credits, and the longer term perspective of the investment for the farmer.
Okay, thank you, Jürgen. Matteo, you've been listening attentively there to the three speakers. I'd just like to perhaps ask you, as co-founder of the Place Finance Lab, how you and this organization bridge that gap.
Yeah, I think that it all comes down to how those investments are structured, and it takes a lot of effort to connect in a place with multiple stakeholders. It takes money and time and effort to do that design and feasibility of any products that is brought to market. So very concretely, the type of work that we intend to do is starting very much from the ground up and identifying those innovators, whether they're the farmers, but we also work across food system transformation, meaning processing. We have a theme that speaks about local infrastructure for a regional food system, and another theme is a generational renewal, which I'm sure people in the room will appreciate. It's quite important, not only new entrants from outside that want to start farming, but also helping the new generation in existing farming family to take over the business, as sometimes that also is a financial struggle. And facilitating the process and helping with the early stage, high risk phase of product development. That's the work that the Place Finance Lab intends to do without having the desire to execute those transactions. And so working with local financiers and very much finding ways to mobilize that local capital, it's also key to the approach we're taking. There is a huge interest, for example, in traditional banking sector who understand how to better serve agricultural transition. It's just that within the processes and internal machinery of a bank, it's difficult to come up with new products. And so if we can help acting as a bridge between the innovation on the ground and the people that have identified what needs to happen and require that capital, and connecting them to who has that capital, is key to our value proposition, and very much taking on that early stage phase of product development. It is nothing new in developing markets where I kind of my background is. We've been doing that for ages. Is that we had the assumption that in Europe we were too good to look at development finance and blended finance as an approach to support our economic development, and I think now there are more and more evidence that those processes and that modus operandi is very applicable to our context as well.
Thank you, Matteo. Thank you very much indeed for that. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to open it up now to the floor for some questions. So please raise your hand if you have a question. 4 distinguished speakers, and Matteo obviously joining online. Great. We'll go to Mark in the front actually, and then we'll pass down. Right. Go ahead, Mark.
Thanks. More of an observation, actually. Hugely interesting panel. Thank you. I want to pick up on what Matteo was talking about, because I think that goes to the key. This point about resilience and what constitutes resilience. It could be soil, could be biodiversity, could be water, could be carbon sequestration. It's the funding of the resilience. And if I'm on a corporation side, if I'm just funding, and it'll sound like I'm being derogatory, I don't mean to be, a hedgerow here or a pond there, I'm very much on the sustainability officer side. I've got to put it onto the procurement side, the chief finance officer side. I've got to be able to bank that and valorize that on my balance sheet. And if I can invest in those things because they're a form of resilience for my supply chain, then I can claim a credit for that I can account for that on my balance sheet, and that makes me more attractive in terms of the people that invest in my business, that lend to my business, and so forth. And I think, and all of you touched on it in one way or another, I think that is what gives me the cause for optimism, is that over the last couple of years, the more enlightened corporations started to move from seeing this as being a challenge for the chief sustainability officer and started to see it as a challenge for the chief procurement officer and finance officer. How do I make my business more resilient? And I make my business more resilient by investing in the resilience of the farmer.
Okay, good point indeed, Mark. I'll go to that gentleman, and then we can perhaps go back to the panel, okay?
How you doing? Listen, great speakers. Really enjoyed the conversation. But just to make a point, following on a little bit on Brendan and Doug and about the farmers, we've had a lot of talk about the complexity of this transformation, you know, in terms of science and policy. And, you know, Brendan and Doug are talking about the starting with the farmers, and that's very true. But I wonder sometimes, do we give enough credence to the diversity of the type of farmers? There was a recent EU foresight study on what farming might look like in 2040, and they identified 12 or 13 different farming types. So it's very hard with this complexity, you know, of the policy and the science, and then I think we undervalue or underrate the complexity of the individual farmers who are going to deliver that transformation. Thank you.
Very good point indeed. I mean, even within Ireland, there's complexity there, and then multiply that by 27 right across the block. Excellent point indeed. We'll come back to that, and I'll just go to that gentleman who raised his hand with the baseball cap. Are they Cork colours?
Absolutely not, Westmeath. And
Westmeath.
it goes to what happened with Westmeath football, shows how a small change in management can have a dramatic effect. It is something we really need in the agriculture and food so that we get results. I spent a lot of time going to football matches where we weren't getting results. We had potentially a very good product. It didn't happen. It's happened, and I'm wearing the hat. My question is, or my observation is, Brendan talked about the disconnect. I suggest the disconnect is even bigger here in this room because we don't have the consumer. We don't talk about the consumer of the food that we produce because that's what largely agriculture is about. And furthermore, do we need to talk about food as medicine? Currently, science or modern science has discovered what how the quality of that food, how it's grown, impacts health. And can we talk about that some more, or can we bring people into the conversation that understand that? Because the consumer, if they are getting a health benefit, which is connected to environmental as well, may be prepared to pay more for the food, and we have to pay less for the medicine.
Okay, good point indeed. And I suppose the beauty of a gathering like this is that we're all consumers, so we can all speak from that point of view. Brendan, a lot of really good points there. I'll come to yourself first. Do you want to respond to any in particular?
Yeah, well, I think the one about complexity, first of all.
Very good.
Like, complexity is so important. There's a wonderful expression, keep countryside complex. And we're doing everything we can to simplify it. And that's where resilience falls apart. So I think nature loves complexity. And I think our countryside needs more complexity. And this is why I love the fact that every farmer is different. I can't believe there's only 12 or 13 categories. I would have put it at hundreds, thousands, because every farmer I meet is different, and the motivations are different, the values are different. And this is why we never tell a farmer what to do. We ask a farmer what needs to be done. And I think that's the key difference. Resilience, absolutely. And I think there's a sweet spot, like in Refarm, we fund a lot of ponds, we fund a lot of woodland pockets, we fund a lot of hedgerows, because they're really important for resilience, because we have a changing climate. We have heat, extreme heat events now where you need, water is going to be a huge resource. You're going to need shade and shelter. We have more storms, so cattle outside are going to need that. So it's a really interesting and welcome framing of what we're trying to do, and it might appeal to more, so I think it's really important. As for Westmeath, I'm from Waterford Hurlers, so can you send your manager down to us? But I do appreciate the fact that, you know, our environment determines the nutritional value of our food and the taste of our food and the health of our communities. And I think some of the unsung heroes are the small-scale local producers who produce with minimal input and use that food locally. And I think we've maybe lost sight of the importance of that. But there is a sweet spot where healthy food healthy nature, healthy communities interface. And I think maybe we've moved a little bit far from it, and we need to get back into that bullseye space, because that's where we need to be in future.
But it's alive and well in the Burn, by the sound of
Absolutely.
things. There you go, Brendan. Doug, would you like to respond to some of the points raised by those three gentlemen?
Well, I'll start again by agreeing with everything that Brendan said. That's
That-
for a start.
that's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer.
Then just on the resilience side, actually, before I started doing this, I did management systems. And I was like a Swiss Army knife. I could do whatever you wanted in energy, carbon footprint, in health and safety. And I got really fed up because it's a paper. It's a box ticking exercise, and it achieves nothing. So you're talking about the procurement officers I would have loved back in the day when I was doing this, to have been able to reach anyone in the procurement or the finance section with the slightest inkling about what you're talking about. So I think that's also an issue until we have, you know, a kind of an equivalent party on the other side understands what the hell we're talking about, then we're kind of at nothing. Yeah.
Okay, Doug, thank you. Jürgen, you listened attentively there to the
Yep.
3 points. Anything in particular you'd like to respond to?
Well, let's say the 3 points are interlinked, but if I take complexity and consumers, for instance, life is becoming extremely complex. And let's say the more knowledge we have, the more complex things are becoming. And the question is, how do we communicate that complexity towards consumers? And we certainly have consumers who have an interest and who are going to search for that knowledge. But let's be honest, the majority of the consumers, if they're in a supermarket and they have to compare 2 or 3 products, they're looking at the price, and that's it. Now, if you want to get more information, it's somewhere on the package, and I have to say, I bought special glasses only to read what is in the supermarket, because that's the one and only place where I'm not able to figure out anymore what the textual material on it is. And we are getting information on health, we are getting information on the environment. So even on a small package, there is a lot of information, but up to the level that we are not able to grab it anymore. And let's say, if I'm looking just in the last 12 months in my supermarket, I'm extremely surprised, because all of a sudden on all of the products, protein rich. I'm buying exactly the same product with exactly the same amount of proteins, but all of a sudden I have the impression that I'm eating 3 times more proteins.
It's a buzzword at the moment, right?
But yeah, so it's the way how knowledge is used by marketeers,
Yes.
to convince a consumer, or to give at least the idea to the consumer that he is understanding part of the complexity. And I think, let's say, not only in agriculture, not only in food-related aspects, but in general, in everything we do in society, I think translating that complexity into things that people are able to use in daily life is a major challenge.
Okay. Matteo, yourself, final word. You listened to some of those points raised by your counterparts and also the audience, the participants. Anything you'd like to respond to in particular?
Perhaps a very quick comment on this last point, which is I also think that sometimes we are too focused on understanding the complexity of everything, while oftentimes even just going with your taste buds and what tastes good usually points you in the right direction. At least that's kind of how I like to see it for myself. But one point around resilience and also the conversation that we are having within the Place Finance Lab on the concept of systemic risks. I think we are far from integrating those concepts into the structuring of investments. I think that's where definitely I would like to be, but now it's too early because the conversation now is about mobilizing certain actors on those bases. So since 22, we had 2 wars that really showed how reliance on imported chemical input can impact. It's not about the environment, it's about the viability of a business. And so there you start seeing people more inclined to listen to a proposition that allows to improve the resilience on that front. Ireland is the place of grass-fed, start thinking about with the new models on climate projections, what's the availability of that grass, is our current operating and production system, is it going to be viable in a different climatic conditions? We've been talking to Cornwall and Devon, never had the need for irrigation. Now water storage is a big problem, very dry summers. People start thinking about this as a must-have investment. Those are things that do not talk indeed to the sustainability people in a business. It's very much about how can I make my production efficient and especially long-term. And these aspects of business viability, longevity of a business is key. Oftentimes that got a bit lost, but I think that's really what attracts a lot of the actors we're talking to, and hopefully is going to be a key for more and more engagement in those type of professionals that was mentioned by the audience that can inform decision and have the ears of the board to kind of convince them that this is not only, as I said, something that we do for good, but is sensible and the right business decision.
Thank you very much indeed, Matteo. We're going to have to wrap it up there. So my thanks indeed to the speakers, Brendan, Doug, Jürgen and Matteo, and all of you, ladies and gentlemen, for taking part. So we shall wrap that up there. I invite you to return to your seats. Please give my speakers a warm round of applause.
Thanks, Rose.